Good evening, everybody, and greetings from San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site Visitor Center. We are super excited to be launching season 2 of our History at Night program. Obviously, I wish you could be here. We really enjoyed having this program here on site last year and into recent months. If you joined us in June for our first virtual, we felt like we mostly survived that, so we're going to give it another shot to get the fall season going forward. I'm Bryan McAuley. I'm the site manager here. And on behalf of the staff at the historic site, on behalf of the Texas Historical Commission, we're really excited that you would take some of your time to join us tonight. And personally, I'm really excited that I'm going to have a chance to chat with a longtime friend and colleague and mentor about a project that's very near and dear to all of us, but particularly to him. So a couple logistical things. We're not going to interrupt anything in progress for questions. We've got a fairly structured program for you tonight for about the next 40 minutes or so. But send a chat anytime something prompts you to, and we'll process those at the end as part of a Q&A. That's how we're planning to manage most of the questions tonight. So we're not going to do a raise hand or a video or a toss to anyone back at your house. So if you need to send something to us, just do it through the chat feature. And without a whole lot of other ado, I'm going to get started on moving us into a discussion of the Villa de Austin, which is our outdoor exhibit. I said Villa this time. We joke about whether Spanish or English. We're going to have Villa, San Felipe, San Felipe. Take your pick on the good front. And tonight, like I said, our guest is Michael Rugeley Moore, who has been a longtime champion and project player in the San Felipe efforts. So Michael, I want to start by letting you tell our viewers who might not know you very well, give us a little insights into your museum career and how did they find themselves so intertwined, or how did you find yourself so intertwined with San Felipe?
Well, good evening, Brian. It's a delight to be here with you and all of our audience. San Felipe and Austin's colony story has been with me since childhood. It's something that I've carried around for 40 plus years, and just been thrilled to be part of the development of the site by the Texas Historical Commission. In fact, back in 1976, I was but a 14-year-old who was just so eat up with history, I wanted to get all involved in it. And I started out as a reenactor in the Texas Revolution era. And in fact, in 1976, as a 14-year-old, I was in a film that was made here. So my first experience with the site goes back and seeing it at that point. And it kind of carried with me the idea that this very important site really was somewhat neglected. Okay, it was really neglected. And so as I went through my high school days, and I wrote an essay on Stephen F. Austin and his colony that received a scholarship, and then as a college student at the University of Texas at Austin, history. And when I graduated, I wanted to get involved with museums, and I found a museum in Fort Bend County that had some of the same storyline as San Felipe, of the Austin's colony and the old 300 and the settlement in this part of Texas. So that brought me to Southeast Texas, and just really thrilled with a job there that I planned to spend maybe 2 years as the director of the Fort Bend Museum, and it turned out to be 20 plus 2 or 20 plus 3 maybe even. And during those years, I had a lot of opportunities to further research this time period of Austin's colony, and to develop some programs about how those land grants, how the land given to Austin settlers impacted families in Fort Bend County and other counties, like the George family and their ancestors, and how to show programs about life in early Texas. So in the development of the Fort Bend Museum, we did exhibits about Austin's colony. We did historic buildings related to Jane Long and other old 300 settlers. And then in the development of the George Ranch Historical Park, we tried to show the evolution of that story in one family's hands, how that land carried through 4 generations of women, and had many stereotypical kind of big Texas elements, but it was all because of the land that Stephen F. Austin had granted to their ancestors. And so periodically my museum career would reconnect with San Felipe. In 1986, for the Texas Sesquicentennial, I tried to do an exhibit among all the county museums in the area of Austin's colony. Didn't do so well as far as collaboration, but we did the exhibit ourselves. In 1993 was Stephen F. Austin's 200th birthday, the bicentennial. And we brought some programs here to the historic site to kind of program it for the day. And then a little bit later, in about 2000, began working with a consortium of local business community groups and civic leaders to create an archaeological focus and try and figure out where was the town. So beginning in the year 2000, our little volunteer group got together and hired a local archaeologist, Marion Marek, who did some research on the private land surrounding the historic site. And from that really came a sense that there was something here worth preserving. And it's just a wonderful ride since then. Was as a volunteer, as president of the local Friends group, or the Stephen F. Austin Historical Museum Association, as it was called, and now the Friends of the San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site. So as a volunteer, as a research contractor, the THC, as an exhibit content specialist. I'm sitting in an exhibit, as you can see behind me, that opened 2 years ago, and just thrilling to see how the stories that I research play out in an exhibit that people can come visit now. So all these kind of play together. Yes?
I was going to say, an important part of that, of course, you and I worked together. I was privileged to be someone that worked under you and benefited from your tutelage in Fort Bend County. And when I came to the San Felipe project, you were already here. The Historical Commission had been smart enough to bring you on board as a historian and contractor. And we're writing a number of research projects for us, as you noted, that benefited our exhibits. You were integral to the design of the exhibits that are in the main visitor center today. And then you happened to help us out with the site guide that you can see there. So I consider that the bestseller. It is the best-selling book that we carry in our gift shop because it's such a great souvenir for people to take home. So we're super excited that we could have you involved in that process. And for any of you at home that are interested in it, we're gonna have a little retail opportunity involving the book at the end. And if you stay through the credits, I hope we have some clips from that movie Michael mentioned from 1976. We'll see if we can get those queued up too. All right, Michael, tell us about this outdoor exhibit, this Via de Austin, and your vision for it, and what the thinking was to bring this last element to light in the San Felipe exhibit model.
In the exhibit, it tells the story of settlement and the land office, and then the community of San Felipe, and then finally the story of the Texas Revolution. And the community story is told wonderfully through a digital touch mural, in part because we didn't have the artifacts, we didn't have the square footage in the exhibit space, just many things that we couldn't tell the stories of people and common life and such. And so part of the interpretive plan I proposed in 2015 was to take those social history stories and give it their own immersive space. So we have some parts of the historic site that would be focused on archaeology, where things really did happen. Some parts with exhibits and walking trails about this was here, and this is where Jane Long lived, and this is where William Barrett Travis lived, and that sort of thing. The museum exhibits, of course, focus on the genuineness of objects and stories we found. But there was something missing. There was not a place to say what the town looked and felt like, since it all had been destroyed, all had been burned. And so this idea of an immersive space, all new made, so it's no curatorial restrictions. You can touch things in it. You can burn a fire in the fireplace. An immersive space, and it was primarily focused on children initially. The idea was that it would be a school hands-on learning center for schools. And as the planning kind of evolved, that's still an important function, but it was also thought that perhaps it would be useful and of interest to visitors generally. So the Villa de Austin will be opened and have a place where people can go. And we'll talk more about that through the course of the night.
Yeah, and I'm excited to say, as these buildings started sprouting up this summer, just an amazing process, and we're going to get into that more tonight. But our visitors that are coming out still months ahead of the exhibit being open and accessible are getting supercharged when they see these things from the parking lot. So it's already creating a visual that's getting quite a buzz. And I think your idea of being able to connect people to that visual aspect of the town is a really important one.
So conceptually, it was conceived as being one sample block of the town. We've told people that we're not building the whole town. This is just a sample, and we chose one. We call it a block. Actually, it's 3 contiguous lots, and we found some wonderful stories that relate to them. We found very good intact archaeological features, a lot of archaeological evidence, as well as good archival evidence. And so these 6 buildings, including a printing office that was the first print shop in town, the school and Sunday school of Thomas J. Pilgrim, the first Sunday school in Texas, the courthouse where the court met and the conventions of 1832, 33, and 35 were held, and the Texas Revolutionary Government, a hotel that had a brick-lined cellar called the Farmer's Hotel, and with it went a kitchen where an enslaved woman named Celia lived and cooked, who also helped with the adjoining bake oven, a brick bake oven that was very prominent in town. And so a very important feature, we thought, to kind of show that element of town life. Plus some other outdoor activity areas will be nearby about surveying and militia and woodworking and brick making and a variety of different activities.
I'm curious about some of the trades that you're trying to bring in as part of the construction process. So there's an image of something going on there with some woodworking, but talk a little bit about that aspect of the project.
In this project, I'm under contract as the construction manager to the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission, and we decided this would be a code compliant project. So we would build it consistent with modern building codes and yet still have all the traditional woodworking and joinery and masonry to show this genuine view of life. And so balancing those two created some real challenges, which it's engineered by structural engineers and civil engineers, and yet we didn't want that to show. We wanted to look like the buildings did in 1830. So we had to find traditional materials, how bricks were made back then, sawmills that might saw us the lumber that might look like the lumber did. We looked for artisans who made traditional log buildings and found 3 of them that have each built several buildings here. And so, you know, within this, a wonderful window restoration maker in Weimar, Mr. Shernock. And so we found artisans who had great skills that we could apply to this tradition of building and have a way of showcasing artisan traditions as well as what the architecture looked like.
Very nice. It's really been impressive to watch these things come together in the field and to meet up with some of the folks. So just so people understand, obviously there's a lot of things going on in our economy today, and museums can be a challenging place to get projects funded. Talk a little bit about how the capital campaign for this overall project is helping you bring the villa to life.
The museum exhibit that opened 2 years ago, the building and exhibit were funded by the state of Texas. But concurrently with that, there was a capital campaign by the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission, where many generous people contributed little and small amounts, large amounts, all kinds of amounts. And that funding has been used for the current project. So we're being privately funded, which is very nice, a public-private partnership for the historic site. And the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission and their executive director, Anjali Zucchi, has been very wonderful in raising these funds and their capital campaign committee. And now we're able to spend private money to build trails and do some other site improvements, as well as construct the Villa to Austin.
That's excellent. And we're really excited that we were able to stretch this money as far as we did to bring this exhibit fully together. So in the construction process, I know we considered a lot of things. There was a time, me being kind of trained by programmers and interpretive specialists like you, had a vision. Maybe we build these buildings as a program and it would take as long as it took. And we ended up on a very different path, but it's an intriguing one all its own. So there's a lot of off-site aspect to the project. Talk a little bit about how that's playing out.
Well, part of the efficiency in this project is that we started the log construction at workshops in Fort Worth and Pennsylvania and Virginia early in the spring. And then only in the summer did our general contractors, Forney Construction of Houston, open up the local job site and start with earthwork and structural concrete and that sort of thing. So we got several months jump on getting the trees out of the forest and getting our artisan vendors a chance to hew them and notch them and assemble them. And this provides really a traditional view of how to build. And we look for traditional log builders. This isn't quite like the vacation homes you might see in Colorado. These are, they started with the trees in the forest, and the trees were delivered to their workshops and then they hewed on them with broad axes, foot adzes, often sawn with their own lumber mills, their own band saws, which kind of replicates the same kerf of the logs, how the logs were sawn back then, either by a hand saw or the water-powered saw of the Cummings family. So we look for these traditional materials, traditional artisans, and they spent their spring assembling their buildings on their own workshops. You see them in this picture. And then in summertime, in August, it was a little hot, I'm afraid, they started arriving here. And so it's been a very exciting time from July and August and September to see the buildings arriving and beginning to be put up on the foundations that we had prepared for them.
So I'm really curious about some of the chasing you had to do to get specialized product. I'm looking at the book that we have in front of the screen here. There's a number of things that really took some work.
We found a wonderful handmade brick maker, Old Carolina Brick Company, and they happened to have a stock size and color that came very close to the original bricks that we've excavated here. And in this picture, you see the Farmers Hotel excavation on the lower left done by the Texas Archaeological Society and the Houston Archaeological Society. And we found a lot of original objects that we were able to copy for this. So original hinges that we've excavated, our blacksmiths have made copies of that, the shutter hook, brass doorknobs. We try and find the genuineness from our archival research and the archaeological research, and then find a way to depict it, to copy it, to use that to inform the buildings, the furnishings that'll be going in them. And then, like I said, in August and June, we started the on-site construction phase, and then in August, the first building started arriving. So it's been a very exciting time. This is our site, which was somewhat of a bowl, and we've made it into a bit of a hill. And so it looks very different than this now. So that's the first day of on-site construction with the surveyor setting the stakes for where the buildings would be.
So I'm curious, while you're talking about that bowl aspect of the field we're constructing this exhibit in, one of the things that I think is really compelling, although it's part of that modern engineering, is the idea that the site's going to be mobility accessible for anyone who's in a wheelchair or needs assistance without creating the kind of modern intrusions that usually impact a site like this. Talk a little bit about how that's going to work.
It's, I think, a wonderful part of this project. The original site, which is located on the west side of FM 1458, is a hill that slopes down gently to the river. And so we're recreating that topography and using that gentle slope to be able to get wheelchair visitors gently up a slope where they can get into every building at grade, and eventually they wind down all the way to the cellar. So you can go from about 8.5 vertical feet without needing a ramp or a lift or an elevator, just by the gentle slope of the land.
Very nice. One of the other engineering stories that I've been fascinated in watching these buildings come together has to do with how the logs are going to dry over the next few years. And I know you've talked a little bit about how we've built in some support to allow that to occur while keeping the main components of the building, the door frames, the windows, from being impacted by that shrinkage. Just talk about what the process would be, both historically and what we're doing to adjust to it.
Well, historically, Noah Smithwick, San Felipe's kind of raconteur of the time, recalled a story of the Farmers Hotel, one of the buildings that we're constructing. He remembered that it had been constructed, built, roofed in, but left unfinished otherwise. And it was used at the moment as the temporary town hall, he said. And I was convinced that the builder was letting his building shrink and dry and settle before he added the frame additions and windows and doors to it, because otherwise the shrinking of the log, the settling of the building will crush your windows and doors and other things that don't shrink. And so in modern times, we've decided we didn't want to wait 2 or 3 or 4 years for the building to settle before we put the windows in it, for example. So modern log cabin construction uses a series of techniques to allow the logs to settle while the chimneys, the door and window frames all remain rigid. And so it's been a wonderful, each builder has a different technique, but it's been wonderful to see how they plan for these buildings to shrink and settle over time.
It's really fascinating to watch it all come together. I want to talk a little bit about just the team again that you've been able to pull together. Talk a little bit about the different expertise that each of the teams brought and how that played into their selection.
Well, there's 3 log builders, each contributing different structures. So the pictures you're seeing right now are for when Southwest Log and Timber Works were here at the end of July and 1st of August. And they built the I want to say the crudest or the oldest style cabin, which was the round log Pilgrim School that you see in the background there. And they also built the nicest structure, which was the frame courthouse. So their crews built them both in their Fort Worth workshops, and then brought them here and reassembled them. And you see here the assembly of the roof, the rafters and such for that. The second builder is Dan Arruda from Pennsylvania, and his company, Pinecraft Log Homes, comes from an artisan tradition that goes back to some of the renaissance of log cabin building in the 1970s, 60s. And one of the members on his crew, Tim Gott, is the son of kind of the patriarch of this technique of new building of old traditional log cabins. So it's been very exciting to have them here in September as they put together the Farmer's Hotel and the kitchen that goes with it. And then the final building that'll be arriving is coming from Virginia, and Kevin Rowe of traditional hand-hewn log homes will be bringing that building, which is the printing office. And that should be arriving in several weeks.
Now I recall in thinking about this craftsman trade component, which is a really fascinating part of this whole process. You mentioned with Pinecraft Homes, being able to kind of complete a circle that took you back to some of the recruitment you did with the work that you put together at the George Ranch Historical Park. And I was really excited to see you be able to make some connections that have crossed over that much of your career, but mention how that played out.
Well, it was fun. In 1991, I created and proposed, and the George Foundation helped fund and build a log cabin farm of the Austin Colony era. And I found a traditional log builder named Lenny Rizzo, who was in Louisiana, who built a cypress cabin, a dog trot cabin for the George Ranch. And as I started on this project, I thought, okay, I want to see maybe if Lenny's still around. And unfortunately, he's deceased. But it kind of tapped me into his folk tradition and people that he had apprenticed and mentored, including Dan Arruda. So kind of finding people in the same craft traditions, and it's been really fun to see how they've passed on these skills from mentor to apprentice over the years.
Yeah, it's been really exciting to meet all the guys and to hear them talk about their motivations and inspirations. And so even though there's a lot of modern engineering and some really important work in making these buildings accessible and safe, I find it fascinating. We've got such a great crew of people that are committed to keeping these historic traditions alive. It's just wonderful out there. I wanted to chat a little bit about the whole arrival process. I think we all felt really giddy when these things started showing up. Was it about what you expected? Are the buildings going up on the pace you expected, or has this been something you're learning from as well?
Well, they're different sized crews. So Martin St. Jacques from Southwest Log and Timber Works had the largest crew, and so his buildings went up just quite remarkably fast. They'd been pre-assembled in their workshop in Fort Worth, and so I'd get tied up on a phone call or something, and I'd walk out and miss 30 minutes or an hour, and I'd miss something. I missed the picture, and it was really remarkable to see how well he had planned and how quickly they went up, because they'd been up previously. So that was so he gets the speed award, and each one's a little different. So Dan, who's here right now, his buildings had not ever been put together. So they had been hewn and notched, and so they take a little more fitting, a little more time to fit them together. And so I really get to enjoy seeing his work on a little slower pace, and I get to take more pictures and the morning panorama, as I call it, of how we take a picture every morning. And so it's been nice to see their traditions, and they're really awesome with chainsaws. They're awesome with traditional tools of slicks and axes and various things like that. So it's been just really a delight to watch them and learn from them.
So one of the craziest stories that I was exposed to in thinking about this town and this project over the last decade plus has to do with the slides we're looking at now and the fact that we have this hotel building with historic accounts of it having a brick-lined cellar. And in planning for this reconstruction, thinking about how we would incorporate that cellar into the storyline and into the geography of this outdoor exhibit.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, this is an example of where the archival record and the archaeological record I thought were at odds with each other. So the archival record is clear. It's a 6-foot deep brick-lined cellar. And so Linda Gorski, the president of Houston Archaeological Society, called me on a Saturday and said, we're down to the floor. They're excavating the hotel. We're down to the floor. And I said, really, how deep? Oh, it's about 3 feet. And I said, that can't be the floor. The floor is supposed to be 6 feet down. And of course, you know, it took me a while, silly me, to figure out, of course, the hotel basement was some feet out of the ground. So not all 6 feet were underground. And so that made perfect sense. So eventually, you know, the archaeology is helping to inform the archives and vice versa. So the pictures you see of the cellar being built is not our final grade. We have another foot or 10 inches, well, 15 or 18 inches of grade coming in. So the cellar will be buried a little deeper than it is now.
And presumably, I mean, it's a fairly ambitious engineering project to put a cellar in the ground today on our hill out there. But almost 200 years ago, the intent, as best we can understand, would be some kind of a cold storage. Is that your best guess?
Everybody who's excavated from all the different archaeological projects have contemplated, why would they go to this effort? Because it's very unusual, it's hard to drain, hard to keep dry. And in the archival record, I think is the answer. The merchant and tavern keeper and baker who owned the hotel had like 72 barrels that he had to store. Barrels of molasses, of sugar, of flour, of whiskey, and all kinds of drinks for the tavern function. And these 72 barrels had to be stored somewhere cool and safe. And that was the reason for having the cellar. So it was a form follows function. You know, they built it because they needed it.
So we still have a handful of buildings that are left to come, and I know the crew is actively working on the outdoor bake oven. What are you looking most forward to in terms of the next chapter here?
Well, we're past the peak of construction, so all but one building are here now. We have a lot more work to do, though, with the carpentry phase or scope. So I thought, who could do the carpentry on such a project as this? And I recalled a restoration contractor, Bill Robinson, that I've worked with on a lot of restorations in Fort Bend County. So Bill and his nephew, Jared Pratt, and their crew are doing the carpentry, all the things that involve square nails, driving square nails of floors and siding and interior wallboard for those that get those nice finishes. So the carpentry is ongoing, and the masonry is ongoing, where chimneys are being built. Some reflect kind of before brick was being produced here, like a stick and mud chimney, 2 of them. And then 3 chimneys are brick made of bricks. And then plus this wonderful bake oven that our masonry contractor, GWS Services, is building right now. It's very exciting to see that.
Well, certainly on the programming side, we're very excited about being able to add this stage and to do some great program work out there. So obviously there's going to be additional dirt work. I know there's a component to this project that involves some pathways and access to other parts of the site. Can you just mention really briefly what we're going to accomplish by completing that project?
Well, it's wonderful that the site has some great stories out around north and west of the museum. And previously visitors couldn't get to them very readily. So we have a handicap accessible path. It's about half a mile in total length. And we have some exhibit panels that were put out 2 years ago that will realign to this pathway. And so you can walk a nice pathway and go to places where stores were located, where homes were located, where businesses were located. And we hope it'll really bring people a chance to explore the town as a space and a place. And then come to the Villa de Austin and get an immersive sense of what it might have looked and felt like.
So I've been dealing with a lot of visitors who are here now as they come in, having seen the buildings under construction in the parking lot, and then come in and take our museum exhibit experience. In the final film, which you helped us put together, we were visionary enough or thinking far enough ahead. It concludes with a slide that says, "Outside awaits what remains of San Felipe de Austin." And I've really found it nice to tie that in for people and say, well, the construction you see happening out there is part of that outside remains. And as we finish this project, there'll be a great chance to come out and explore and see these things happen. So do you feel like, as this project evolved and we looked at exhibit context, do you feel like for the most part, this is going to complete what we need to tell a really efficient and effective story to visitors?
I think it'd be a wonderful complement to the other parts. And I want to make clear that this view of this one block is not being built on its original site. The original site is across the road and is still available for continued archaeological research. And that's really why we didn't want to put new construction on top of the original archaeology, because there's so much more we intend to learn from it. And some of those things will add additional information to our interpretation. I fear, of course, that some things will refute things that I have come to conclude. And I live in worry that in 20 years or 50 years or 2 years, somebody's going to find some evidence that says, oh, that was wrong, you should have done it differently. But that's part of the learning process. That's part of why we interpret what we know and we explore to learn more. And there will always be new learning. So we think it is a vibrant place. The villa will be changing over time, added with new content, new stories. And maybe one day, if it's ever proved to be outmoded or outdated or incorrect, I guess we'll burn it down and have a big reenactment of 1836 and start over again. Who knows?
Well, if we make 20 to 50 years without finding much in the way of error, I think you've done pretty well. Thinking 2 is a pretty frequent museum average. As we're looking at these bake oven images, of course, that reminds me, to your point about archaeology, that's one of the features we haven't been privileged to discover yet in the archaeological landscape. And so it's going to be a great resource to have. And to your point, we haven't done anything that prevents us from continuing that search. So that's going to be a nice part of this as we go forward.
And so instead of putting it on the original site, it's located very close to the museum and convenient. And that's one of the things that we really wanted was an immersive space for schools and visitors that's very convenient to the museum. It's not far away. It's not hard to operate, hard to use, but it should be a very, very close and convenient experience.
Very good. So we were privileged just in the last week or so to have one of our communication staffers come out and shoot a little bit of this aerial, this drone footage that's going on now, which gives us some interesting new perspectives on the buildings, and I think can really help you as viewers who might be watching this program tonight get a sense of the scale and the scope of this project. So as you might have seen in that first map, these constructions are just east of the existing visitor center. So as you come up, we hope the experience will be come in, enjoy the main museum exhibits, and then transition out and see these nice new additions in the landscape out there. Just a couple of other questions about the construction process, Michael. I'm curious about, for all the work that you've done, having built an outdoor museum, a living history museum in the past, what kind of things have you learned? What's been new to you going through this process and figuring out how to do these things?
Well, it's been a very fascinating process. Beginning from the idea that nobody knew what the town looked like. Nobody knew what the buildings looked like. And Noah Smithwick's description from 120 years ago was still the best description of what the town was. And in about 2014, I did a research study about kind of the built environment. What was where, what it looked like, what were the building materials. And that really drove a lot of the interpretation in the exhibit, the touch wall and the outdoor map plaza, but it also has helped drive the insight for this project. And so the way I think I was able to work to design these buildings was first I built their lumber yard in my mind. I looked at every raw material they had. What kind of material were they hewing? What size trees do they have? The surveyor's field notes list the type and size of trees at the time, which is very insightful. Where'd they get their nails? Where'd they get their glass? How big was the glass panes? So I built the lumber yard, and then we could put it together to fit the descriptions from the archival and archaeological record. And so it's been really fascinating. And I had a wonderful chance to work with the Historic Site Division's staff architects from the Texas Historical Commission. So I would write a report about a building, and I'd say, here's everything that's known about it. And I would describe it for them. And then our staff architect, Paula Rose and Glenn Reed and Jesus Nehar would translate that into into building designs. And that was a fascinating process of learning to see if I think the window panes are this big and I know 6/6 windows will come, and then what does that result in? And so we built these buildings from kind of the raw materials up to fit the sizes, dimensions, locations that are known in the archival and archaeological record.
Yeah, it's just a really fabulous project, and I think everyone who's had a chance to touch it has enjoyed playing a role and helping bring these things to life. I apologize to the audience. I'm noticing we've got a little bit of staticky start and stop with the drone. So I apologize. That's not more seamless. We may have overbuilt our technology platform here tonight. We've got just a little more time letting you see some of that drone footage so I can ask Michael a couple of questions still. And then we're going to transition into Q&A here shortly. So I appreciate some of the chat questions are already coming in. If any of the rest of you are thinking of something you might want to ask, this would be a good time to cue those things up. So the last thing I wanted to say specifically about the buildings, Michael, what kind of maintenance is going to be required on any of them that might have a programmatic function? Is there a visitor experience that might be involved in what we do to keep the buildings in good shape? Is that something that I know other museums do that kind of stuff?
You betcha there is. These buildings are designed, there's no paint in this town, and so there'll be some maintenance. Primarily when these buildings settle, as they dry, the clay and lime chinking that we're going to be putting between the logs will crack out, and so we'll need to replace that in several years. So that's a great Tom Sawyer project to get your hands muddy and help us rechink a cabin. But in a broader scale, there's many opportunities to get involved with how the place interprets the building trades. We're going to do demonstrations and workshops of timber framing and log hewing and brick making, and those will be used in the program. So you can help us by sawing out a board or making a brick, and then we'll do something with it.
Very nice. So I'm also curious, obviously, once the buildings are complete, this isn't really the focus of tonight's program, but do you want to mention anything about either the archival research that's gone into a furnishings plan or how we make these things come alive once the stages are set?
Well, I'm very excited about the furnishings plan. I did a study of the kind of the material culture of the town and the surrounding colony, and came up with the furnishings that should have been and were in each of these buildings. And then we decided in our initial program planning that nothing antique, no original artifacts are going to be used in this. And that's partly because they don't exist. They haven't survived in many cases. But in other cases, we want it where children and people can use them, can sit in the chairs and sit at the table and spill ink at the desk if they have to, and be able to really immerse themselves in it. So everything is new made. And in some cases, we're copying original objects, specific objects, a table that was in the runaway scrape, or the chest that's in our exhibit, or various things in our exhibit. In other cases, we're finding artisan vendors who make reproductions of furniture and furnishings of the time. And then all the little things, from clothing and cloth, our volunteers are working to build some furniture. In fact, on Monday, one of our volunteers was in Austin at the Bullock Museum measuring an original piece of furniture to copy. One of our volunteers has done a lot of hand sewing of the curtains and things like that for the buildings. Just a wonderful way of kind of showing in color and dimension and texture and fabric and fiber what these buildings would have been furnished like. And then, because they're not antique, let people go explore them. And exploration is really a key concept to how we intend this to be programmed.
So I've always been fascinated since I've had a chance to work with you on this project, at how frequently probate records have held surprising keys to a lot of what we're dealing with. You brought it up in terms of the realities of the seller. Obviously, those kind of records would be integral to thinking about what you're going to populate these buildings.
But probate records have a lot of material culture evidence, and good for us, bad for them. But of, say, 5 owners of this block of property, 4 of them died within about a 6-year time period. So there was inventories being done and evidence from their receipts that were all very helpful and influential in determining the furnishings plan for this.
So one specific story, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves interpretively. This has been a great program on how this project's coming to light, and we're coming up on our Q&A period, but I'm curious about the clock story. Can you give us a quick update of that fascinating story?
So the clock story is New England shelf clocks, Connecticut shelf clocks are very popular in the 1820s. And the Connecticut peddlers came west with their cheap wooden clocks. And one fella came to San Felipe and died. And whenever somebody died, they held a probate sale to sell their property, their assets, to pay off the debt, since it was an all credit economy. And so in 1832, there was a probate sale for 50 some odd wooden shelf clocks. And so, of course, they flooded the market. The prices were horribly depressed, and everybody in town got to end up with a shelf clock. So it was kind of a fun story of material culture that we intend to interpret with a clock in the hotel and maybe one in the courthouse.
So as we begin to transition into kind of our Q&A here momentarily, is there anything that you really want to share with people about this project, Michael, that I didn't think to ask you about or you didn't get a chance to comment on?
Well, just that my hope is that I want to create a place for people to get excited about the past. The history is not just behind glass in a museum exhibit. History is out there, and you can touch it, you can feel it, you can learn from it. And we hope to build that kind of a place that people, young people especially, have a spark. They say, this was something that sparks an interest. And later in life, they come back to it and they travel to historic sites or museums, or they collect antiques, or they do things that kind of represent a lifestyle interest in this, that for many people it sparked at a very young age, 9 to 14 years old. And so with explorations, with apprenticeship kind of programs, let kids come and explore the place in greater detail, and with immersive opportunities for children and grown-ups of all kinds to come and kind of live the life to whatever extent they want to. Bake at the oven, or make something, or do something, or even put on historic clothing and spend the weekend. All aim at trying to create a place that sparks an interest and builds lifelong interest in the past.
Well, we can't be any more excited about the stage that you're helping bring to light for us here. And we're really excited about rolling out the toys here soon and starting to share this with people, hopefully in the spring of 2021.
Well, I think that's an important point to make. Spring of 2021, we hope it's ready and open. And so that's kind of for you to decide how it's programmed and when, if we're in the current COVID era, but it will be ready.
I had a generic question about that, and I actually thought about making this point when we started. Not that it matters much to the technology for you folks at home, but Michael and I are in the same building. We're both in the exhibit hall tonight, having a chance to have this dialogue from afar. And I thought about the fact that in this COVID pandemic, we see each other almost every day over the top of a mask. So I almost forgot what Michael looked like.
It's true. It's a refreshing change.
Yeah, we could do this without the masks. We had a visitor, just a basic operational question, and I'll answer this before we get into more of the Q&A. The site is open. I think there's some confusion as we've all struggled with how the sites operate. So we are open 5 days a week right now. We're open Wednesdays through Sundays. It's always nice to call and just make sure that whatever we've got on tap for the day jives with your schedule and what you hope to do when you arrive. The current pandemic rules have us wearing masks inside the building, doing everything we can to socially distance. So we're keeping groups to small sizes, typically about 5 people from the same household, bundled together, no more groups than 10, and having them socially distanced within those groups. The biggest challenge for us in reopening in May is that we have so much touchscreen content that we're working group tours where the staff demonstrate a lot of that, so people aren't having to be nervous about what the potential touch transmission could be. But we are open. Stick with us. We hope you come out and see it. And if nothing else, from the parking lot, you'll get a nice glimpse of the future of this great new exhibit. Let's see. I saw the acknowledgement slide come by, Michael. Was there one you specifically wanted to point out that I know we talked about almost everyone on that slide, so I think that was a good chance for people to see that. Let's see. Looking at some of the questions that have come in from the viewers tonight. Thank you all. If you're not sticking with us through the questions, we appreciate your time. I'm also curious about the pit saw. Someone specifically asking if the pit saw is part of the reconstruction.
It is. The pit saw figures into several of the stories. One of the owners of the hotel died when a log fell on him from the pit saw. We began the pit saw last fall in a workshop that Martin St. Jacques from Southwest Log and Timber Works hosted for us, and it's half finished. undercover. And this fall or early next year, we'll have another workshop. So those that want to learn about timber framing can come out and finish the pit saw frame. It's a wooden frame, and then we'll install it. And we're still trying to find the saw. We found a company in England, so it's a tough time to get stuff shipped internationally, but we're trying to get the saw purchased and have it sent to us.
Very nice. Somebody asked, what's the deal with the little tree on the roof?
Well, it's a topping out ceremony. A tradition especially in Scandinavian countries where log building traditions come from, that when you get to the highest point in the building, you top it off. And there's more specific folklore about it, about honoring the trees and the forest and the loss of those trees, right? And
we have a Facebook post on this week too. So if you have some interest, place it there. We've had interest from people that are pulling in and seeing it, and that's a recent addition to the exhibit because they've just reached that point in construction here in the last week. So it's been fun for us to share some of that. Someone's asked, since we brought it up as our Tom Sawyer chore going forward, or maybe they're offering to make it at home and bring it with them, what the composition of the chinking for the cabin is. How was that done?
Well, had I not changed clothes, you could see it all over me today because I did about a dozen different samples of different recipes, mostly clay, lime, and sand in some proportion. So we have different clays. Acme Brick Company, our local brick maker, donated some clay. That's real nice local clay. We're working with that. And so some combinations of dirt, clay, sand, lime.
I realize I misread my question about the pit saw. I think that might be some insider baseball. We had a workshop for the pit saw last fall and began the construction with our help from our friends from Fort Worth. So the actual question that they wanted me to ask, because they're probably putting it on their calendar, is when will the pit saw be built? And they'll be planning to come back and help you out in the second workshop.
Well, that's wonderful. Stay tuned to the Facebook page for the site. We'll announce that. We hope to do it in the fall, but it may be early next year before we do that workshop.
Gotcha. There's a question about, because I guess people recognize on a frontier you're going to deal with sort of mercantile things. Is there a store and trade component in the plans for the VIA?
There is. The Farmers Hotel, the owners who expanded it and added the brickwork in the cellar, we think, were merchants. They brought a small stock of merchandise to town from New Orleans. They were also the bakers and ran this tavern. And so one of the outbuildings might have been the store. What we interpret as the school might have been the store at one point. But we've decided to interpret one of the two main rooms in the Farmers Hotel as their little store. We have a complete inventory of all their merchandise, which is very nice. And so we're finding that merchandise to display. It won't be for sale. I wish it could be, but it'll be for display only. And then the other main room of the Farmers Hotel will be interpreted as the tavern, where they had drink and entertainment each evening.
On a related note, our good friend Judge Ken Wise asked if we're going to be selling clocks clocks in our stores. That may be a little challenging down the road. I think it could be a
It
great.
was hard to find reproduction clocks that we could afford. So the craft industry of making high-end clocks, we found some bargains for our furnishing plan.
It could be, since you were able to find some of these, there could be an opportunity for a fundraiser down the road. Maybe we have a way someone can auction or win a clock in some measure from us. But they're probably a little higher priced than our typical museum visitor is going to spend in the store. I think we've answered the question about when we can visit. The target opening on this is going to be in the spring. There are a lot of things that are going to be impacted by the recovery from the pandemic and everything else. And so we'll navigate that. As Michael said, pay attention to our Facebook page, take a look at our website, and we'll keep you posted as things come online. The furnishing component and the rest of the exhibit work, Michael, you presume can be done, let's say by March?
That's right. The substantial completion by our general contractor is before the end of this year. So we'll have the buildings substantially complete, but then there's a couple of months needed to landscape, to furnish, to put in fixtures, really to kind of finish up the project. And landscape is one thing we're really trying to maybe drum up some local support for, that come plant a tree or help donate some landscaping features to us, so we kind of build the ambiance of the landscape as well.
That prompts a question for me, just because I get to hear you talk about it a lot as we're navigating the construction site. Talk about our historic tree problem, if you don't mind. Put that in a nutshell.
Historic tree problem or opportunity?
Yes, it's an opportunity that the modern world might see as a problem, but I thought you'd like to update people on that.
Stephen F. Austin, the town had its own streetscape tree that a Mexican Army officer commented on, how the streets were lined with Louisiana lilac, and he gave the Latin name. And Louisiana lilac trees have naturalized here, and they grow everywhere. And we thought about transplanting some to kind of create a street-lined avenue in our little villa. And it all sounds so wonderful and such a great thing to have the descendants of the original trees to play with. And it just sounds so wonderful. And then until people say, Louisiana lilac, I haven't heard that tree. And you say, yeah, you might call it a Chinaberry. And so it's it was a very popular tree in Mobile and New Orleans at the time, but has been kind of overtaken by crepe myrtle and some other things as a modern landscape. So people think I'm crazy for wanting to redeem the poor tree and the poor Chinaberry tree. So, but I call it Louisiana lilac, and people think it's really cool.
It's wonderfully distinctive, whether it's invasive and problematic or not. It's a neat look, I think. We had a question about whether you have a favorite story that you think this stage is particularly going to be able to tell.
Well, I have several favorite stories. It's like, which of my children is my favorite? I can't tell you that, but I'll tell you two or three. Noah Smithwick, I mentioned earlier, was the town's raconteur, the storyteller. In his recollections in the 1890s, he tells a number of wonderful anecdotes that we'll be able to illustrate, either by a storyteller telling you his story or some character portraying him or an exhibit or something like that. And these range from the printing office Godwin Cotton to various people in the hotel and the school. He kind of picks up all the buildings and stories. So that's one we're really excited about. So some of the buildings are public buildings: the school, the courthouse, the printing office. The others related to the Farmers Hotel have a different story of these merchants who moved here. One was the baker, one was the merchant. They had a falling out between the two, and they split their property. And they also owned an enslaved woman between them, whose name was Celia. And so Celia's story is going to be very critical, very central to this era. And I mentioned that one of the owners was killed at the pit saw in an accident, and the other owner then manumitted or freed Celia, gave her freedom in 1832. But the other co-owners' estate wouldn't let her go. They kept trying to recover her value or her own person. And so she had to hire William Barrett Travis as her lawyer to defend her freedom. And so the story plays out from the kitchen where she lived, the bake oven where she worked, to the pit saw where one of her co-owners was killed, and ends up in the courthouse where Travis is her lawyer, and the courts decide that she, in fact, could be free. So it's a wonderful story that will play out in our little villa, and a story that tells a lot about the time and slavery and freedom and this family and this legacy of the family. In fact, there's a number of descendants in our community in the Houston area who trace their history back to Celia and her daughter Freeanne. And it's a wonderful way to connect people to the past, as I see it. So that's a favorite story. I guess I rambled on about it, so it must be a favorite one.
Those are pretty good stories.
I had an intern this summer, a museum theater intern from the University of Texas, and she and I co-wrote kind of a dramatic depiction of Celia's life. So kind of a walking tour through these buildings with Celia telling her story and reflecting on what her life was about and what her legacy is. So that may be something that we might stage in the future.
We lost Michael.
Oh, no. Okay.
No, I'm still here.
Oh, excellent. I thought you were freezing up on me.
I just stopped moving. I'll move a little more. Is that helpful?
So the fascinating aspect for me, of course, helping to plan for eventual programs in this place is when you can take one of these buildings that's going to support so many great stories and then multiply it by the landscape that's out there. I think we're going to have a chance to bring some really compelling content to bear. I had an odd question that I hope I'm reading correctly. At first, I thought it was a B&B question. Are we going to let people rent a room and sleep at the hotel? But I think they're asking me about the construction of the hotel. Where did people sleep? How are we interpreting that part of the story?
The Farmers Hotel was the smallest of the 3 hotels, taverns, or inns in the town. It's not very big, and there's a room or 2 downstairs for the dining and drinking and whatnot, and then 1 common loft above. And so it had at most maybe 4 or 5 people lodging there, and probably, you know, fairly small scale. So hotel accommodations here in 1830 were not very good. People would sleep on the floor and upstairs in the loft, have to bring your own bedding. It was very crude, very primitive. And most travelers really said this place really isn't ready for visitors yet, but that's the way it was.
Not ready for prime time. So it looks like one of our friends and colleagues from Washington, Nebraska State Historic Site chimed in for the person looking for information on chinking, and mentioned to us they're hosting a weekend program on chinking and daubing. So if you want to go out this coming weekend, go figure out how it's made, and then we'll put you to work here when we're ready to go.
That's right. Well, how about an outreach from Washington, Nebraska? We're going to need all of them to come.
I'm sure we can borrow some of them as well. Absolutely. We have a question about livestock and animals. How important is that to the story, and are we going to be using them in interpretation?
Well, speaking of Washington, Nebraska, their Barrington Plantation is a wonderful working historic farm, and part of the challenge in these places, we want to have each focus on what's unique. And so we're a town, and so our little townscape focus a lot on things that happened in urban environments. And yes, the hotel had some chickens and a pig and a milk cow. We know that Celia milked the cow and used these things to make her baking supplies. But currently, livestock's not a plan, not part of our plan of interpreting. Maybe one day we'll get the raw material for our bake oven, have eggs, have milk, have lard from our own sources. But for now, I think find a good working historical farm like Barrington Plantation, and that's the place to learn about livestock and crops.
But if you want to learn about town life in Austin's Colony, we are going to be ready to roll soon. So, Michael, I want to thank you for your time tonight, and all of you that have chosen to participate and stay with us this evening. We appreciate you spending some of your recreational time with us and having a little history entertainment moment. Here is the retail pitch that I mentioned earlier. If you contact us here at the museum store, I apologize, I noticed the number's not there, but it's 979-885-2181, or you can send me an email. You're going to get my email on the next screen, I believe, or coming up soon. We're doing a special that involves our somewhat customized Lincoln log set related to our cabin that's inside the building. And then there's the site guide again that Michael authored, which I'm pretty sure I can get him to sign and personalize if that's an interest that you have. So those 2 objects we're going to be selling for $20 as a package to sort of celebrate tonight's program and the relaunch of History at Night, but also the planning for the outdoor exhibit and the Via de Austin coming to life. So feel free to contact us if you're interested. All right. I don't know if this is on a timer or not, Michael. I think I'm through throwing hardballs at you, so I don't think we have any more questions. Here's our thanks. And I can't say enough about my staff who have worked through all this and have wanted me to practice more than I clearly have in preparation for tonight. So thank you all for your patience in sitting through this program. And then coming up, the rest of our fall schedule for History at Night you see there. I will ask your patience, viewers, if you're still with us. These are all moving parts and moving targets. The dates are not, but the structure is. And so we're virtual for now. I would presume our October program with Dr. Greg Dimmick is also going to be virtual. We're exploring some other options for some of the later programs this year. And if we have a chance to have some of you out here, we'll try to keep you as informed as possible through social media or through contacting us here. I think it's going to be a great season, and we couldn't have done any better than launching it with someone who's really intimately known to us as a great historian, a great researcher, and someone who's left some really amazing fingerprints all over this site and this project. So, Michael, this is a great legacy for someone who already had a great legacy in Texas history, and I applaud you for your commitment for your service and for all the help you've given us in bringing these stories to our visitors.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm thrilled at your staff and how they're taking this story and running with it and teaching and serving and working with kids. And it's just such a joy to see this place get up and run and thrive and have people come and explore it and really enjoy it. So I commend you and your staff and the volunteers here for making that special experience possible.
For those of you at home, we're pretty much done. There's the contact information if you need to reach out to me or if you're curious about following up on the site. We always encourage people to look at our Facebook page for the most up-to-date information at San Felipe de Austin. Michael and I get to show up first thing in the morning and do this all over again, masked up and ready to roll. He gets to construct and I get to interpret and manage, but we're really excited that you're keeping in touch with us, taking a look at these programs we're offering to you, and we're happy to be a museum that you support and that you're willing to invest in. So thanks so much for your time.
Very good.